The therapist's voice is calm but probing. The patient looks distant, her gaze locked on the table between them.
Clarissa, you wanted to tell me what happened. Just remember that I'm all ears. Whenever you're ready.
You're not gonna believe me. No one ever does anyways. They just nod, write things down. Then, they call me delusional. But I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. And it all started with her. It was a year ago, back when I was renting that old house on Gable Street. You know the one no one stays in for long? I actually thought I was lucky to find it. Cheap rent, quiet neighborhood. But from the moment I moved in, things felt just wrong.
The therapist's face shows slight skepticism as she continues to take notes, then looks back to the patient.
I see. You can keep going if you want. Like I said before, I'm all ears.
Clarissa then continues in a slightly annoyed tone.
The first time I saw her was in the garden. It was dusk, and I was pulling weeds by the old stone well. That's when I noticed the mark, a strange carving on the stones, like a symbol I didn't recognize. And then I felt it. A cold, chilling feeling ran down my spine, and when I looked up, she was there, standing at the edge of the garden. A woman dressed in black, her face pale and sunken. God, her eyes. They weren't right. Too dark, like they swallowed the light. She didn't say anything, just stared at me like she was trying to decide something. And then she was gone, just like that.
Therapist looks puzzled as their writing comes to an abrupt stop, only to ask the obvious.
And you're sure this wasn't someone just passing through, like maybe a neighbor perhaps?
Clarissa then shakes her head.
Nope. I went to every house on that street, asked if anyone had seen her. No one knew who I was talking about. They all looked at me like I was crazy, but I wasn't. Because that's when the whispers started.
Clarissa's voice now begins to tremble.
It was always at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. I'd hear them, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves. But they weren't leaves, they were voices. They came from the walls, the floor, and the air itself, whispering my name, saying things I couldn't understand. I thought maybe it was the wind, or maybe I was just hearing things. But then they got louder, more insistent. And then, one night, I woke up and saw her again. She was standing at the foot of my bed, just staring, but this time she spoke.
Clarissa then takes a shaky gulp as she gathers the courage to recount what happened to her later on one night.
She said, "The mark is yours now." And then she was gone. But she did leave something behind. A scar, right here.
She tilts her head, revealing a faint, jagged mark on her neck. The therapist leans in slightly, her professional demeanor faltering for a moment.
How did you get that?
She gave it to me.
Clarissa's voice grows more frantic by the minute.
After that, everything started to fall apart. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The whispers eventually turned to screams. I'd see her everywhere, reflections, shadows, even in broad daylight. She was always watching and waiting. And then there was Mrs. Calloway, my landlord. The whispers hated her. They said she was part of it, that she knew what the house was, what it did to people. They told me I had to stop her.
The therapist then tilts her head sideways as she looks down at the floor, expressing a hint of disbelief.
The whispers told you to hurt her?
Clarissa then nods with her eyes starting to water.
I didn't want to. I swear, but the voices, they just wouldn't stop. They showed me things, visions of fire and visions of blood. They said it was her fault, that she was the one who brought the witch. So that night, when she came over, I couldn't.
You couldn't do what exactly?
Asks the therapist as the pen slips their fingers and drops on the floor.
It was like my hands weren't my own anymore. One minute she was yelling at me, and the next she was on the floor. There was so much blood everywhere. And then the whispers stopped, just like that. It was complete silence, for the first time in weeks. I actually thought it was finally over. But then I saw her again, the witch. She smiled at me, and I knew right then and there, it wasn't over. Not yet.
The room grows tense. The camera shows subtle movements in the shadows behind Clarissa, though the therapist doesn't seem to notice it.
What about now? Do you still see her?
Clarissa leans forward, her voice a mix of fear and anger, only to whisper in the therapist's ear.
She's here, right now, standing behind you.
The therapist freezes, her eyes darting briefly over her shoulder. There's nothing there. The camera cuts to the patient's face, which twists into a sinister smile.
I think she likes you.